Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 3rd of April of 2025. Today we have a lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first let's talk about Kiev, because Zelensky today made lots of very important statements regarding the situation. A complete ceasefire is possible in the coming weeks or months. The issue is putting pressure on the Russians to get to this, a complete ceasefire. I think it is possible to do this in the coming weeks, maybe months, especially with this part of the end of the war. That was stated by Zelensky. Also, he stated that Russia have no right to set any conditions for ceasefire, so he strongly believes that Russia should accept everything that the Western countries and Ukraine demand. But when talking about the Russian side, they have completely different understanding of the situation. Basically, today we got report that Russia declines US proposal. We take the models and solutions proposed by the Americans very seriously, but we can't accept it all in its current form. As far as we can see, there is no place in them today for our main demand, namely to solve the problems related to the root causes of this conflict. It is completely absent, and that must be overcome. That was stated by the Russian authorities. And the main issue, of course, is Ukrainian willing to join NATO, and this is something that Russia will never accept. When talking about the situation on the ground, the Russians during the previous 24 hours managed to improve their positions significantly. Now let's talk about this and discuss this in details. And first we're going to talk about the Zaporizhzhia direction. Today the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation reported that as a result of clashes, the armed forces of the Russian Federation managed to establish complete control over the settlement by the name of Lapkova. So this is the territory we are talking about. The Russians show us very fast and very good dynamic in this area. For example, this is the situation by the end of the 1st of April of 2025. The Russians just began their offensive operation. They were attacking and after withdrawing the Ukrainian units to the north of the settlement, trying to cut the main supply and logistic roads. And when the Russians established complete after withdrawn control over this territory, they began their offensive operation. And during the 2nd of April we received the first video, and in this video we can see how 3 Russian soldiers captured probably 3 or 4 Ukrainian soldiers that were trying to hide in the basement of this settlement. So based on this video we have adjusted the map, and we have colored at least the central and the southern part of Lapkova under complete Russian control. As for the end of the 3rd of April, once again today different mappers as well as the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation confirmed complete control over this territory. Of course, when talking about the Ukrainians, they show the picture completely different way. For example, the Ukrainians today confirmed that the village of Petykhatki was captured and secured by the Russians. This is the village of Petykhatki, and according to pro-Ukrainian sources, today by the end of the 3rd of April, just this settlement was captured by the Russians. As you can see, the settlement of Lapkova, according to pro-Ukrainian sources, is considered as a contested area or the gray zone. So of course let's wait for additional updates, and I'll remind you that according to several sources, the Ukrainians have redeployed the significant number of forces in this direction, mainly from the special forces, and most likely the Ukrainians are planning to counterattack in the very near future with the purpose to restore control over the territories they lost during the Russian offensive. In this video we can see how the Russians were attacking several vehicles from this direction, and as a result of FPV drone strikes, several infantry fighting vehicles of the armored forces of Ukraine were destroyed. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the vicinity of the settlement by the name of Orikhiv. We haven't been receiving anything from this area probably for the previous 6 months, but today we got the first geolocation. The Ukrainian sources published the video how they were attacking and bombing the Russian soldiers that were moving along NO8 road. So the progress, we have some adjustments on the map. This territory used to be considered as a contested area or the gray zone under complete Russian control, but today we got the first proofs that confirmed the situation. As we can see, the Russians began advancing along this main road N08 in the direction of the settlement of Novodanilovka. Maybe the Russians were trying to get as close as possible to the former prison that is located in the southern part of the settlement of Malotakmachka. So basically we can say that by those attacks carried out by the Russians on the western flank, by this change on the ground on the southeastern flank, we see that the Russians are trying to tighten the news around the Ukrainian positions in the city of Orikhiv. So most likely the battle for Orikhiv is inevitable. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the South Donetsk direction or in the Komar direction. This is the village of Komar and this is the primary target of the armored force of the Russian Federation in this area. And according to information we have, according to the report provided us by the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, today as a result of clashes, the village of Vesele was completely captured and secured by the Russians. The Ukrainians were forced to fall back further in the northern direction, and now the Ukrainians are trying to stabilize the lines around the village of Fedorovka, and most likely during the next several days the Russians will start making their first attempts to enter the village from the south and to take under control several buildings, maybe several streets. So the battle for the next settlement is about to start, and as you can see, according to this map, according to the configuration, there is just one village left before the Russians begins the battle for the settlement of Korman, which once again is the primary target for the Russians and the main task for this group of forces that currently attack along the river of Mokry Yali. Today the Russians also published a video where we can see how the process, how the battle for this village was taking place. In this video we can see, in this moment we can see their artillery preparation, then we can see how the Russians were attacking the Ukrainian probably FPV drone positions, operators, how the Russians were destroying Ukrainian vehicles, a lots of artillery strike, a lots of accurate artillery strikes. The Ukrainians suffered losses and in the end the Russians answered the settlement with infantry, and the Ukrainians under the pressure of the armored forces of the Russian Federation were forced to fall back. So this is the situation, but once again when talking about the village itself, during the previous days we haven't received even a single video that can confirm the Russian presence there. The only thing we have is the report of the Minister of Defense. They reported that the group of forces east, as a result of offensive operation, managed to establish complete control over this settlement. As for geolocations, we have just one geolocation from this territory. In this video we can see how the Ukrainians were attacking the Russians in the area between the settlements of Dnieproenergia and Vesele, and one of the episodes took place exactly along the bridge. So this is the episode we're talking about. In this video we can see how the Ukrainians were attacking the Russians exactly in this area. Based on this video we have adjusted the southern part, and based on the Minister of Defense report we have adjusted the northwestern part of this pocket. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Bogatyr direction. Today we got a lot of very important updates from this territory. First of all, let's discuss once again how the things were developing. For example, this is the situation by the 31st of March of 2025, and this is exactly the moment when the turning point occurred. After the 31st of March of 2025, the Ukrainian defense collapsed completely and the Ukrainians were forced to fall back. By the end of the 1st of April of 2025, the Russians managed to secure the village of Rozliv completely, and the Russian sources published this video. In this video we can see how the Russian soldiers were raising the Russian flags all over the entire territory of the settlement. According to this video there were 5 flags that were raised, and based on this video most of the mappers adjusted their maps in the Russian favor. By the end of the 2nd of April we got another report that the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to improve their positions and to advance in the direction of Bogatyr along the main supply road N15. Basically the Russians passed around 50% of the distance between the settlement of Konstantinopol and Bogatyr itself, and that was probably the only update by the end of the 2nd of April. And today, during the 3rd of April, we got a lot of updates. The Russians, according to geolocations and according according to a lot of videos that were published both by the Russians and the Ukrainians, began another offensive operation along the main road between the settlement of Andreevka and Alexeyevka. The Ukrainian sources published this video, and in this video we can see a very huge convoy of mechanized convoy of the armed force of the Russian Federation that were moving through the village of Andreevka in the direction of the settlement of Alexeyevka. If we count the number of vehicles, according to just this picture, the Russians used up to 10 vehicles, 10 armored vehicles in this attack. And in this moment, we can see how the Russians reached the destination point and how the Russians began landing operation. As you can see, the Russians landed infantry in this area and the infantry began assault operation. As for this episode was geolocated, and this is exactly the place where the Russians landed. So once again, according to this video, the Russians were moving through the village of Andreevka. The Russians reached this point where they landed infantry, and the infantry began taking their positions, these positions under complete control. So we see that the Russians haven't entered the village of Alexeyevka, they just managed to shorten the distance. But summarizing everything, we believe that the Russians will continue their attempts, and maybe this upcoming night between the 3rd and the 4th of April, the Russians will make another attempt to attack with the purpose to answer the eastern part of Alexeyevka itself, and then the battle for this village begins. So this is the situation in this area. When talking about the pro-Ukrainian sources, as usually, they show completely different picture. Sometimes we can say that they show a wishful thinking picture, because in this, let's say, latest map update from pro-Ukrainian source, we see that the territory that's from the video we just discussed the territories are under complete Ukraine control. But today we got 100% proof that the Russians managed to enter those territories and to land infantry. So when talking about the Ukrainian sources, they show that the edge positions of the armored force of the Russian Federation, let's say edge positions, go somewhere along this yellow line, which is very far from the geolocated line of combat contact. Anyway, we see that despite the gap between the pro-Russian, neutral and Ukrainian sources, we see that both the Russians, the Ukrainians and neutral sources continue adjusting their map in the Russian favor, and they move all maps further in the western directions towards Bogatyr and Alexeyevka. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the area of the city of Pokrovsk, because very interesting updates are coming from this area. I'll remind you that this area, this salient, is very important for the Ukrainians, and during the previous months the Ukrainians made hundreds of attempts probably to cut this salient and to restore control over the railways between the mainland and the city of Pokrovsk, with the purpose to improve logistics not just of the city of Pokrovsk, but first of all of the city of Konstantinivka, where the major battle is going to start in the very near future. And according to different sources, the Ukrainians managed to improve their positions. Neutral mappers reported that Ukrainians during the previous 24 hours carried out another offensive operation in the direction of the village of Solone, and as a result of this counter-attack, the Ukrainians managed to force the Russians to fall back, but the Ukrainians retreat as well. So as for now, the central and the eastern part of the village of Solone, according to many sources, is in the gray zone. Nobody controls this territory, but obviously this upcoming night between the 3rd and the 4th of April, the clashes will resume and the Ukrainians will try to enter the village once again. So we see that the Ukrainians are moving further. Now we should expect another counter-offensive operation in the direction of Pishana, and when talking about the current situation, we believe that if nothing changes, most likely the Ukrainians will be able to cut this salient and to restore control. But we believe that the Russians will redeploy some reinforcements in this area with the purpose to stabilize the situation. But the problem is that the Russians have just one way how to stabilize the situation, and to stabilize the situation in Pokrovsk, the Russians need to improve their positions in the western direction and to establish complete control over all these territories. The Russians need to take under control the settlement of Kotlarovka, the settlement of Muravka, Novomykolaevka, Novosergeyevka, Novoalexandrovka, Uspenovka, Udachne. If the Russians can take under control these territories and to force the Ukrainians to fall back further in the northwestern direction, and then the Russians will be able to stabilize the situation. Without this advance, the chances for the Russians to hold their salient are minimal. But we see that the Russians are advancing in this area, and as for now, the Russians are trying to attack this territory from the south. So let's wait and see, of course, what is going to be next. Now let's discuss the situation in the Konstantinivka direction, the area that's where, according to our understanding of the situation, the major battle is going to take place. And basically, summarizing everything that took place for the previous, let's say, 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly, and the Russians continue advancing. Very interesting video today we got from the area of Novopavlovka, the village that is under responsibilities of the 157th Infantry Brigade of the Armored Forces of Ukraine, and this brigade is responsible for defense of this area. Today the Russians managed to carry out very successful demining clearing operation. The Russians attacked the positions of the Armored Forces of Ukraine, and they managed to destroy the entire minefield. In this video we can see how the Russians destroyed the recently and fresh established mines by the Ukrainians, and now we see that very huge corridor was secured and cleared by the Russians. And due to this video and due to this successful demining, we expect that this upcoming night between the 3rd and 4th of April, the Russians will try to attack the village because they have a window of opportunities. This territory is completely cleared, and Russians have all chances to attack Novopoltavka without any resistance from the Ukrainian side because the minefields were destroyed. So let's wait and see what is going to be. But if the Russians are able to attack and establish control over this settlement, this can become a very huge beginning of very huge disaster for the armored forces of Ukraine. The Russians in this case will be able to secure their flanks and complete, and without almost any resistance from the Ukrainian side, the Russians from this direction will be able to continue offensive operation in the direction of the village of Zarya. Basically, the Russians already attacked in this direction, but as for now, the Russians are trying to advance from the southern direction, and the Russians are trying to attack this settlement from the southeast. During the previous 24 hours, according to information we have, according to pro-Russian resources, according to neutral mappers, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to secure the village of Alexanderpol and Pantelimonievka completely and the territories around both settlements, and the Russians managed to take under control this company's stronghold. This is the situation, for example, by the end of the 2nd of April, and this is the situation by the end of the 3rd of April. The Russians improved their positions significantly. Basically, the only and probably the most powerful stronghold was captured by the Russians, and now there are no more barriers to move further. Furthermore, as you can see, we have lots of geolocations from this territory. The Russians published video how they were attacking and how they were FPV droning the Ukrainian positions in this area. Lots of episodes which means that the Russians first of all try to destroy Ukrainian equipment, try to destroy Ukrainian communication equipment, radars, anti-tank positions, and after this stage of clearing operation, the Russians will begin using infantry and armored vehicles. So we also expect that in the very near future, the activities in this area are going to be very high. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the city of Toretsk. Today, according to many resources, according to pro-Russian resources, according to other pro-Russian resources and neutral mappers, the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to secure the Zabalka micro-district completely and to force Ukrainians to fall back. The Ukrainians abandoned their positions towards the settlement of Shevchenko because there were very high risks that the Russians will be able to encircle the Ukrainians in this direction. Now the Russians began bombing and attacking the Ukrainian positions in the vicinity of Kliban-Butska water reservoir. This is also something like artillery artillery preparation before the beginning of the major offensive operation from the Russian side. So we see that the Russians are going to attack not along these roads we've discussed a minute ago. The Russians are planning to attack from the city of Toretsk in the direction of Kliban-Bytsky water reservoir, with the purpose to reduce as many as possible roads that Ukrainians can use to supply and support their contingent in this pocket. The Russians need to move through just several kilometers, and then they will be able to establish complete FPV drone control over N20 road, let's say at the beginning of this pocket, and this can lead to significant problems for the Ukrainians. Basically, they will lose supply and support, and we're gonna see another disaster by the name of Zarya Cauldron. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the city of Chasiv Yar, where the Ukrainians stopped their counterattacks. The Ukrainians during the previous days suffered significant losses. They were trying to unblock their forces that were caught by the Russians in Cauldron in the central part of the city. Those attacks were repelled. The Ukrainians from the 24th Mechanized Brigade haven't managed to finish their mission, and the Ukrainians went back towards their positions, towards more reliable positions. Basically, they abandoned their forces in this area, and now the Russians resumed their attacks with the purpose to secure this territory completely and then to move further in the direction of Konstantinivka. In this video, for example, we can see how the Ukrainians were trying to organize probably one of their latest attempts to evacuate, to escape the Cauldron, but due to the fact that the Russians established complete control over this territory with FPV drones, the vehicle that the Ukrainians were trying to use for evacuation purposes was immediately destroyed when was discovered. So this is the situation on the ground in this area. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Lyman direction, where the map, as you can see, has been updated once again. According to information we have and according to geolocations, the Russians improved their positions significantly once again. Let's discuss this in details, and basically the Russian major offensive operation in this area began somewhere around 31st of March of 2025. This is, for example, the situation by the end of the 31st of May. There are lots of territories that were considered as a contested area. On the 1st of April, we made first significant adjustment, correction of map, based on the video published by the Ukrainian side. In this video, we can see how the Ukrainians were attacking the Russians exactly in this point. Based on this video, we have adjusted the territory behind this point in the Russian favor. And by this end of the 2nd of April, we got reports that the Russians managed to improve their positions to the northwest of Novolyubovka by taking several more strongholds under complete control. And by the end of the 3rd of April, we received also geolocation that confirms Russian progress on the ground. So we see that the Russians advancing, and we were guessing where exactly the Russians are planning to go. There are few options, either in the direction of the settlement of Borova or in the direction of the settlement of Lyman. But due to the changes on the ground that we are receiving every day, we believe that currently the Russians are planning to continue attacks in the northwestern direction, and this is basically the Borova direction. As for now, the distance between the Russian positions and the settlement itself is less than 30 kilometers, which is obviously is still huge, but the Russians are shortening this distance every day. Now let's move further. The Russians began their counterattacks in the village of Nadia, and today, according to information we have, the Russians managed to restore some positions in the vicinity of the village. I'll remind you that somewhere around 3 weeks ago, the Ukrainians carried out successful counterattack that allowed the Ukrainians to restore control over the village. The Russians denied the loss of the settlement, but we continue receiving updates how the Russians now try to restore control over the settlement. And now, according to geolocation, we see that at least the Russians managed to enter the forest. We believe that the Russians are going to continue because they need to, let's say, attack further in the direction of Chernyshno with the purpose to unite with this group of forces that is moving currently from the village of Novolyubovka. They try to attack this concentration of settlements from the northeast and from the southeast, and they need to attack at the same time and to shorten the distance in the direction of these settlements also with the same rate. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the northern direction. According to information we have, the Ukrainians still have their positions on the territory of the Belgorod direction, despite and regarding reports we received from the Russian side. The Russians are saying that Ukrainians were forced to abandon their positions from the settlement completely. But today, for example, we got another batch of the videos where we can see that Ukrainians still have their positions on the territory of the settlement, and furthermore we see that their positions on the territory of the settlement is getting stronger and stronger. The Ukrainians are bringing more and more forces, they continue concentration of units, and now it's going to be very difficult for the Russians to force the Ukrainians to fall back. But from the other side, we see that Ukrainians suffer huge losses, because to bring additional forces on the territory of Demidovka, the Ukrainians need to go through this Death Valley, and basically this is another cemetery of the Western equipment that was created along the border. Just in this video we can see tons of vehicles of the armored forces of Ukraine, mainly of the Western production, that were destroyed by the Russians during their attempt to cross the border. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Sumy direction. Today from this area we got two important updates. The first one is coming from the village of Guiva. Here we can see how the Russians, as a result of reconnaissance operation, managed to discover the positions of the armored forces of Ukraine from the 129th Territorial Defense Brigade. As a result of several Iskander strikes, these positions were completely destroyed. The Ukrainians in this stronghold were keeping forces as operational reserves in case if the Russians begin attacks in the direction of Guiva. The Ukrainians always have chances to redeploy additional reinforcements here. But now we see that the reinforcements were destroyed, and most likely this upcoming night the Russians will try to enter Guiva once again to establish complete control over the territory. We got another very important video from the settlement of Basovka. As you can see, we have adjusted the map, and currently we see that the Russians most likely establish complete control over this settlement. Today the Ukrainian sources published this video where we can see how they were attacking the Russian soldiers that were moving in the vicinity of Basovka. Based on this video we have adjusted the map. Now we have no doubts that the village of Basovka is under complete Russian control, and most likely tomorrow or the day after, obviously during the next several days, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation will also confirm this information. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.